Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to the Coaching Call podcast. On this podcast, we'll cover various types of coaching by trainers in sports, martial arts, fitness, and business. We'll discuss each coach's methods to getting the most out of their respective athletes or clients and how they attempt to change the platform in which they coach. Join us on a fun adventure as we discuss unique coaching styles. Coaching is a universal part of how we get others to get something done. Join your host, Rafael, and his guests on this unique journey in coaching.
Hi, I'm Sifu Rafael, and this is the Coaching Call podcast. If you enjoy this episode, please subscribe and leave a review. This episode was made possible by listeners like you. Matt, good morning. Thank you so much for being on Coaching Call. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing great, Sifu. Thanks for having me.
Oh, man, I'm excited. I'm excited to talk to you because of all that you're doing. But epic mindset and 3D thinking. I mean, not just 1D, not 2D, 3D. I love that. Let's get into that a little bit, and then my curiosity will get the better of me, and then I'll get into some other things as well.
Awesome, fantastic. Yeah, 3D thinking. So that's based on my framework from contextual intelligence, right? So contextual intelligence is an area that I've done some research on. It's a space that I've been real proud. Yeah, no problem.
Go ahead.
It's always something, isn't it? You know, I teach grad courses. I always tell the grad students, hey, if your phone goes off, it won't bother me. I promise I can work right through it. But so 3D thinking is actually related to the idea of, it's tied into the concept of contextual intelligence, which is one of my research specialties and focus areas. And the 3D stand for the 3 time orientations that all of us are a part of. We are found in time. You know, and so we live in this material physical world where time is a constraint to us. So when we talk about time, there's 3 dimensions of time: hindsight, which is the past; insight, which is the present; and foresight, which is the future. And when we talk about those 3 dimensions of time, it really has a lot more application for how we lead, how we think, how we evaluate opportunities, how we make decisions. And a lot of times we default to one major time orientation to give us input on how to affect our surroundings or affect the people around us. And what the 3D thinking mindset does is it teaches people that not only is one dominant time orientation important, but all 3 are. And most people, statistically speaking, are going to be hindsight dominant focused. In other words, when a decision has to be made, when an opportunity is presented, those types of things, they go to their hindsight. They go to the past. What happened last time? How do I evaluate what's going on based on what I've learned in the past? Things like that, which is normal. And that's totally okay. The problem is if you only use hindsight, or for those listeners of yours who are like visionary leaders and really have a lot of foresight, you know, they might be foresight dominant people, right? Foresight dominant people can see the future. They have an aspirational identity. They love what they're doing out there, but they have a hard time with hindsight. And so the idea is not to focus on one time orientation as the primary input, but on all 3 time orientations. And we need to develop the skills to be 3-dimensional thinkers. And for some people that comes really easy, and for others it's much more difficult.
Oh, yeah. Wow. Great insights, my friend. And Richard Evans said, Matt, some research, LOL, you're the man, right? So,
thanks, Richard. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. When we think about everything you said, to me, it starts sometimes, I think that intuition also makes a big difference on that, right? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so intuition is huge. And this is one of the spaces that my particular model of contextual intelligence allows for intuition. Some, you know, and some might disagree with that, and that's okay. Right. You're allowed to be wrong. You know, I don't mean to be provocative, but no, you know, intuition is very much an important part of it. Is it the only part? Absolutely not. Do we need data? Do we need evidence? I am a Ph.D. research, focused guy. So I understand very much the need for evidence-based medicine, evidence-based practice, evidence-based insights, all those things. I get that. We need to have data, but we also really, if we're honest, use a little bit of our intuition in this decision making. So now how I leverage that in the contextual intelligence model and the 3D thinking model is through the concept of tacit knowledge. Okay. So you may have heard of, many of us are familiar with explicit knowledge. Explicit knowledge is the things that we learn in a formal structure, in a class, through a book, through a workshop. It's taught from one person and given to another person. That's explicit knowledge, the exchange of information. Tacit knowledge, on the other hand, is information that things that we know, we believe, we're sure of, we're confident of. But if somebody were to ask us, well, how do you know that, or where did you learn that? They're going to say, yeah, I don't know. I haven't really thought about that. So that's tacit knowledge. And intuition, wisdom, insight, tacit knowledge, all of those are very similar terms. So within the 3D thinking model, tacit knowledge is very much related to the skill of developing insight, right? It's being present, focused on the present. And if you foresight, for example, requires what I have 3 meta skills that are very much tied to the 3D thinking model. So I'll just go over those quickly. So in order for foresight to be maximized, you have to embrace and understand the reality of complexity. And we differentiate complexity from complication. A lot of times we think, hey, my relationship is complicated. My finances are complicated. My life is complicated, whatever it is. And I would argue that, no, it's not complicated. It's complex. And there's a difference in those two words. And when we truly come to embrace complexity, the way that life presents it to us, then that actually aids and assists our capacity to practice foresight. Then we move to the next one, and we talk about insight. And if we want the meta skill that's required for insight is tacit knowledge. We have to understand where it is that the information that we think we know, the assumptions that we make. If you're scientifically oriented, it's heuristics would be the word. The heuristics, the rules of thumb that we use to make the decisions that we make. That's intuition, right? It's like, I don't know why we should do this or not do this. I just feel like we shouldn't. And that feeling is based on something. It's not just something that just came from outer space. It's literally based on experiences that you've had, things that you're going through, and what you anticipate to happen. That's where that intuition converges to give you insight to know what to do right now in real time. Then, of course, the third area is hindsight. The third time orientation is hindsight, which is the past. And the meta skill that facilitates that is a concept called synchronicity, which is basically how we manage and use coincidences. So coincidences happen to all of us throughout the course of our day, our life, whatever. And when those coincidences happen, some people can just dismiss those immediately as coincidence, and they put no value or stock into it. But at the very least, they recognize that is a coincidence. Other people take the concept of coincidence and will go to the other opposite extreme and be like, God is speaking to me, kind of a thing. So wherever you fall in that spectrum doesn't really matter. It's just the concept that synchronicity is that everybody recognizes the concept of coincidences. And for some people, many people, they make meaning out of those things. And that's where your hindsight actually comes from. So if you're not aware of that, you're constantly going to misremember the past, which is why so many people aren't as successful as they want to be in their relationships, their business, whatever it might be. It's because they think they're using hindsight accurately, but they're actually not. And the way to fix that would be to understand the concept of synchronicity, get somebody else to help you remember what actually happened, and then integrate the 3 time orientations.
Wow. Really deep. And you made me think of coincidence. And I'm going to say in Kung Fu Panda, Master Oogway says there are no coincidences,
Right.
right? And but in that those wise words, it made me. A lot of the kid movies are actually made for adults, right?
Very much
But
so.
it can teach a child or a kid that, wait a minute. If I pay attention, if I see things that are going on in my life or around me, and I start being present, I can understand things better. I can comprehend. Even when I go to school, maybe I'm in fifth grade, wherever I am, now I start to really see what's going on in the world around me, right?
Yeah.
So it's not just for us adults that we need to understand that all of the concepts that you talked about are relevant to who we are, who we become, right? But let me ask you, how on earth did you become this knowledgeable, incredible human being that I've seen before me and I'm starting to love? So I want to get to you deep down into, and your friend Richard is just he's asking tons of. I love this guy Richard. Right? So, and then he's also going into marketing. We see, right? So I love that you're interacting with us, Richard. Thank you for being here with us, right? And then for me, it some of the things that happen in life, the way we wind up where we are, sometimes it happens from childhood. So tell me, where were you born? Who influenced you before the age of 10? And then we'll go up your timeline to today.
Sure. So I'm from Ohio, the great state of Ohio, what we say here, the heart of it all.
Mm,
And so Toledo, Ohio is kind of where I call home. Grew up there, lived there most of my life. Before the age of 10 years old, I mean, I have to say, and I hope that's not too cliche, but it's sincere and I mean it, is the biggest influence in my life was my dad, my mom
mm,
and my dad, I tell a funny story around that, and it's actually, well, I was about 10 years old, so I'll say this, and this has been life changing because this is actually the genesis, or where at least I trace the genesis
mm,
of the contextual intelligence mindset too. And it was a situation where I was 10 years old. I had a standing routine where I would come home from school and kind of drop my bag by the front door, my school bag, head to the kitchen in the back of the house, grab a snack, and then out the back door to play with the neighborhood kids, right? And that
mm,
was what I did almost every day. And this particular day, I came home to drop my bag, and my mom was standing there waiting for me, and she told me that I couldn't go out and play today because I was being punished for
mm,
not doing my chores before school. I kind of neglected my morning chores, and now I had to not only do those chores that I neglected to do, but I had to do like extra chores as penance for that. So I'm like, so I'm going to miss my opportunity to play with my friends. So I said to her, I don't even remember what I said specifically, but I said something disrespectful. I disrespected my mother. And what I didn't know was that my dad was home. He was actually around the corner in the kitchen
mm,
listening the whole time. Now, normally when I got home from school, he was still at work. Well, today he was home and he heard it, right? So I made those comments. He came flying around the corner and grabbed me on the shoulder and just walked me over. It wasn't violent or anything like that. I don't want to give the wrong impression here, anything like that. But he just grabbed me by the shoulder as a father would do, and walked me over against the wall. So there I am standing against the wall, his hands right here on my shoulder, and he gets right in my face, right? He's like nose to nose, right in my face. And he says to me these words, and I remember them blowing my mind. He said,
mm.
"Don't you ever talk to my wife like that again." Right now, that might sound like, well, that happens to every preteen adolescent boy, in the world, kind of thing. But what I remember thinking, Sifu, and this is what's so profound to me, even to this day, I
Right.
remember thinking in my mind, who is your wife? It
Right.
never occurred to me. It never occurred to me that my mom and his wife were the same person. Of course, obviously, you know that, but I never made the connection that he would relate to her differently than how I relate to her. And he would think of her differently than how I thought of her. That never occurred to me. And so my dad was a funny guy. So he continued that. He said, don't you ever talk to my wife like that again. And this is the part that kind of went over my head at the time, but now it's hilarious. He said, if you ever talk to her like that again, we'll kill you. And no one will ever know you're gone because we can make another one that looks just like you. You know, kind of a thing. It's like, okay, Dad, you're a funny guy. So then he's like, go do your chores, kind of a thing. So then I just went and did my chores. And I remember as I was doing my chores, I still was caught up. Now, again, I didn't have the entire epiphany right there at 10 or 11 years old. But I remember over the course of time thinking more and more, it's like, you know, if that situation played out the same way and my uncle was the one in the kitchen, he would have said, don't talk to my sister like that. If it was my grandfather, he would have said, don't talk to my daughter like that. And then all of the sudden, my mom became wife, sister, daughter, friend, all these other things that I'd never even thought of her as before. And that really was the genesis of the whole contextual intelligence idea, where I begin to understand so many of us go through life not aware of who the people around us are, what situations we're in, and how much more valuable we could be to them, how much more impact and insight and innovative, creative capacity we would have if we understood what other people think of themselves and what other people think of the people we're interacting with. Wow. If we knew that, we would have so much more insight and be more effective. So,
wow. Now, your dad probably did not mean to teach you that particular lesson. When did the epiphany come for you?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So in college, I would say in my doctoral program, to be honest with you, it was later on. So I went through high school and then I went to college. I majored in athletic training at university. So my background is sports medicine. I am a certified athletic trainer. I'm also a certified strength and conditioning specialist. So I have kind of a sport healthcare background. I've spent a lot of time in those early days working with sports teams, football, baseball, basketball, a lot of track and field. In fact, early in my career, I was one of the athletic trainers for USA Track and Field, and I traveled with them on many international trips, in Brazil and South Korea and different places where they competed. Ended up being a Fulbright scholar, and we'll talk about that later and all those kinds of things. But it was in college where I began to realize that this is something significant. And I'll say it like this: it was, again, kind of another epiphany where I remember, I actually didn't remember that story too much until one day, one of my colleagues came into my office, shut the door behind him, which always makes you a little nervous, right? It's like, it's like, oh gosh, what's going to happen? And this colleague was actually one of the associate deans. So it was my boss. I was like, that's even more scary. And he comes in and he sits down in the chair in my office and he asks me, after the pleasantries, we got to the point that he was there for. And he said, I've been watching you I've been there 3 years at the time. He goes, last 3 years, he goes, in a personal question, he said, I've been really envious of your family and your marriage.
Wow.
And he said, I've just been watching how you treat your kids. I've met your wife several occasions here and there. And he actually said to me, he goes, his kids were a little bit younger than my kids at the time. And he's like, I want my kids to be like your kids, and I want my marriage to be like your marriage. Wow. And so he asked me some questions around that. And it was during that conversation that I remembered the don't talk to my wife like that story. Right. And it was at that point that I began to start putting things together. So I began to write on this idea of contextual intelligence. I had previously just finished my dissertation a few years before that. And in that dissertation, I had introduced what I thought was an interesting notion, the idea of contextual intelligence. It was all around that same time I was teaching a Sunday school class at the church that I attended, and for adults. It was an adult class, and we were just doing a study on King David, right?
Right.
And what's interesting about that is when he was coronated king, the story goes that there was a particular point where all the 12 tribes of Israel came to him and offered him something, and one of those tribes was the tribe of Issachar. And what the tribe of Issachar brought him was knowledge of the times and discernment on what to do. So they were the scholars, they were the mystics that came and were able to help him in his new kingdom see what was really going on in the world around him so that he could be successful. That always has captivated my imagination. So I was teaching a class on that. And the very first time I actually used the term contextual intelligence was in that class. And one of the students asked me, well, how would you describe what the tribe of Issachar was able to do for David? And I said, I just kind of just off the hip kind of said, well, they brought to him contextual intelligence. And then that kind of resonated, and I happened to be working on my dissertation at that same time. So I went back to my dissertation, looked at the findings and the research and all the different, and that's kind of where the genesis of that came. And so it all happened very serendipitously. A synchronicity, you can say it's coincidence, or you could say God was speaking to me. Again, wherever you go with that,
you get the message.
Exactly.
It's very interesting. This morning I read 2 Samuel 15.
Okay, wow.
About David, right?
Yeah.
That's what I was reading this morning. When you before you get into, because you got into all of this stuff, but what was your relationship like with your mom after that episode, and with your dad? And then what was it like going into high school? And was there a catalyst that made you choose the profession that you went to? What did you want to study and why?
Yeah. So I would like to say that I became the model child, right after that incident where I was learning things. But of course, I was a normal kid. I mean, we have tensions in the house, but all that. But I did have an incredible respect, and still do, for my mom. And that really helped me understand, because one of the things that I began to understand is like I just alluded to, is my dad thought of this woman in the house completely different than I did,
Right.
And this may sound cruel, but I promise you it's not. And I promise you it was incredibly insightful to us kids, because my dad at one point in our lives said this to all of us kids. And I have four, there's me and three other siblings. So there's four of us, and I'm the oldest. And he would tell us all at some point around this time, around the the teenage years, he would make sure we understood that we were. He would say it like this. I don't want to put words in his mouth. He would say it like this. He would say, "Listen, your mom and I were a thing before you were a thing, and we're going to be a thing when you're gone. Leave the house." So you need to understand you are just a passing phase in our life, and I'm going to equip you to live your own life, be your own man, be the man that I believe you're to be. I'm going to feed you. I'm going to shelter you. I'm going to love you and educate you. And we did. We had private education. We had a tremendous vacations every year, all that kind of stuff. I had an incredible childhood. But part of that incredible childhood was based in the reality that I understood where I stood in the grand scheme. I knew my place and what I was being prepared for to do. And so that was huge. So within the process of growing up, I was always aware of that. I always had the stability and security of knowing who I was, where I stood, and what the ultimate goal for me was. Right. And that was incredibly powerful. And which I think that really gave me the impetus to pursue the things that I pursued, to go after. I've always loved sport. I was an athlete in high school. I was an athlete in college. You know, I have two adult sons now. Both of them are very much athletically minded. My one is a power lifter. My second one is a black belt in martial arts, and he does, all this stuff. And so they both have very much, similar kinds of things. And so I felt really good about that. But, to your question of when I went away to college, I didn't know. I always knew I'd like that kind of thing, but I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And now, when I went to college, it was the old school days when you went to, the student union to register for classes, and you had a card and you went and stood in line. There was no online registration.
Right.
So I was standing in line to register for my classes, and I got to my turn in line. And the guidance counselor that was there happened to just ask me a few questions. And I was intending to major in sports psychology. That was my intention. I was interested in the thinking and the mind and how the mind worked and all that kind of thing. And so he asked me a few questions. He goes, "Oh, you like sport?" and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And he goes, "Have you ever heard of athletic training?" And I had never heard of it. We didn't have an athletic trainer in high school. He said, "All right, well, I'm going to put you down for athletic training." He kind of picked for me. I didn't even know. He goes, "It sounds like you'd be a good athletic trainer." So he registered for me for those classes. I showed up in class the first day. And by the end of that first day, I remember talking to some of my roommate at the time and my girlfriend, who's now my wife,
Nice.
talking to her and saying, "I think I found my people." And it was a totally accidental thing. And so I loved it, and I fell right in, and I just soared. And because of the security that I felt, other people who thought like I thought wanted to do what I do, and here who knew that I would end up being in healthcare, working in the sports medicine setting, and able to do all the things I wanted to do, which has been an incredible career for me. But it was really kind of, again, another accidental thing that I didn't do intentionally.
Matt, so that leaves the question of what's happening to our kids now. There's no one there because they're signing up online, and it's whatever they choose. There's no true guidance. Nobody listening to what they may be truly saying, because you said this gentleman asked you some questions and kind of helped guide you. But when we fill something out online, there's no guidance, right?
Yeah.
And when you, at the end of the day, you said, "I found my people," it was because of the interaction that you had with him. Had you not had that interaction, who knows where you might wind up. Your career may have been a little bit different. You may have eventually wound up here, right? But I think that the human interaction is so powerful that look what it did for you. Someone saw you, and they saw what you needed. But if we do it all the stuff online, if we don't communicate with our children, then that doesn't happen either. And that's probably the most important thing. And I love the fact that your superior came in and gave you, accolades as to your family life, the way your children were, the way you treated your wife, because it shows not only the kind of person you are, but the kind of person that you're helping your kids become, right?
Yeah.
And you talked about your kid, one being a martial artist and the other one being a power lifter. And there's a passion that goes into anything when you have to be stressed during it because you're achieving something. So powerlifting, you have to stretch your muscles. Martial arts, you have to stretch your body to do certain things, right? So it's really incredible when I believe that the human connection is so critical that I think our youth are slowly losing it with all this virtual stuff.
Yeah. I don't disagree. And this is one, again, every parent, has their philosophy on how that goes. And, for us, it was really important. Now, I think what's important here is everybody understand that, my dad was very intentional. And I, of course, at the time I didn't know it. Looking back now and seeing what he was doing, how I can see, oh my gosh, Dad, you were brilliant. But now and the kids don't get that. Not that their parents aren't there and not bringing that kind of thing, but we relegate, we abdicate so many normal interactive things to the virtual space. Like, so I didn't have that growing up, I didn't have a cell phone till I was 32 or something like that,
Right.
and even then it was one of those flip, it wasn't a smartphone,
You and I both, my friend. You and I both.
So that kind of thing, is real. And we had to depend a lot on our mentors and our advisors to help us see what we didn't see and recognize. And I had learned early on to trust and respect those in authority over me. Okay. And I just grew up, but I know not everybody has that. Not everybody gets that. I had trustworthy and respect worthy people in my life. And so that's what I tried to recreate, even with my own sons. In fact, my wife and I agreed very early on. We came across some curriculum, and it's called Raising a Modern Day Knight is the name of the curriculum. And so I don't even know if it's still available today, because this was 20 years ago now. But we found that curriculum, and basically the gist, and I'll just give you the general gist, is it's the father's responsibility to find 2 or 3 other men who are respectable and trustworthy and have integrity and character and all those kinds of things. And collectively, you invite those other men to speak into the lives of your sons as they grow, and specifically around particular areas of what they call rites of passage. So the first rite of passage is it's 8 years old. So, and we decided, my wife and I decided, well, the first rite of passage that we want our sons to go through is to conquer their fear. And we want to really address it. So I invited, my brother was one, and one of my very dear friends. And so the 3 of us, we took the boys on a big camping excursion and introduced some fear into their things and took them on some big roller coaster rides. And it was a whole weekend thing, but the whole theme of the weekend was conquer and overcome your fear. And then 12 years old is another rite of passage. 16, 18, and 21 are the rites of passage. And so these men were involved all the way through that now. And so that's what we did to help get that outside influence. And even to this day, my sons still revere both of those men, as they call, one is their literal uncle, the other one's not, but they still call him Uncle Jason, and I think that's really, really important. And then we also were that family that didn't really allow social media in the house until the kids were like 16, kind of a thing. So that helped with that as well.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. So, Jason, along the way, besides your dad, did you have mentors? Did you have coaches that really impacted the way you even think today?
Yes. I mean, so there's several things. Obviously, I think, I talk to other people and I'm like, I'm so woefully inadequate and behind, but I think I read quite a bit. And so of course I have some favorite authors that have really influenced my thinking. I also, my faith has been really important in this process. Not only that, is these friends that I talk to you about, while they're peers, they are also very much advisors, and we frame and define each other's thinking. We actually have what's called a blind spot weekend once a year, where we get together and we talk about the things that we don't see in our own lives that other people do. And we make a covenant with each other, not to make excuses when someone says, hey, you're a real jerk about this because you behave this way or you act this way and you're developing this tendency, and we make a covenant not to make excuses for those observations, because the natural tendency is be like, oh yeah, well, you didn't know the backstory, or the reason I responded that way because of this, and you would have no way to know that. And that doesn't hold any water with anybody, because it's still how it was perceived. So those friends, my brother is one. Another gentleman was a very important mentor in my life and early in my career. Several of my bosses still to this day are very much instrumental. I still call them, and I have this question: what would George do? What would Doc do? What would Dad do? And I still to this day ask myself those questions when I'm facing a difficult situation. But I've been very, very blessed to have many mentors help me.
So along the way, you've been a mentor, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've been a coach. You've inspired people. What's one of the things that really lights you up when somebody comes back to you and you see the impact that you've had on their life? Look at the smile that just came over you.
Yeah, that's a ton of fun, because one of the things that I get the greatest joy out of is when they come back and tell me, you said or predicted that this would happen. I didn't believe you when you told me, but it did. And because of that, I was ready for it, and that happens actually. I just love that. That's happened a few times where I'll get an email, I'll get a phone call, and somebody will say, hey, remember when you told me to be prepared for this about year 3 of my career or whatever? And I was like, whatever, that's never going to happen. And it did. And I just was floored. And I rose to the challenge, because you made me think about it ahead of time. And I normally would have been caught off guard. And so that for me has been a very, very awesome experience. And I'm proud to say it's happened a few times, several times, where I just try to help people see, okay, this is the journey. This is where I think you're headed. Now, I could be completely wrong. And of course, I've missed it a lot of times too. Mm-hmm. But most of the time, I don't say most of the time, it's fun when you say, listen, this is where it looks like you're headed. These opportunities are probably going to present themselves if you continue to develop in this way. When they do, be prepared for that and have an answer ready, and then when that does, that's amazing. And so that's what I love the most about the mentoring relationship. And then just being able to see that they responded well whenever an opportunity or a stressful situation presented itself.
Yeah, love it, love it. You made me just remember of a gentleman recently. He came back. He was visiting. He moved away, but he came back, and the minute he saw me, he said, "Bring it in," and I gave him a hug. Right? He didn't let go.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it got to be a little bit uncomfortable, but then he whispered in my ear. He goes, "Thank you.
Yeah.
You changed my life." And I was like, wow, I'm happy, that occurred for you. And this gentleman walked in to my facility, and he's a bull in a china shop, right?
Sure.
And a big burly guy, but man, the heart of the biggest heart you can ever imagine. And he slammed down on the counter, everything fell off, and he goes, "Sign me up, I'm ready." And when he had gone through all these yo-yo things, diets and functions and minds and all these things. But every time that we got together, I helped him in different areas. And he turned around. And when he lost 25 pounds, he goes, "I've never lost 25 pounds." Mm-hmm. He goes, "What are you doing to me?" I said, "Well, I care about you, and you're listening to the guidance I'm giving you." So a lot of times that we do, right? You work with athletes, I've worked with athletes. Because some have not, right? Do all of the athletes take time before they actually realize that what you're guiding them in is for their benefit?
They all don't do that, but the good ones do.
Right.
And I think that's one of the differences in performance. So, I work with literal athletes, and now I like to call them corporate athletes. I work with corporate athletes, and there's a similar mindset. Now there is a breakdown, and I do write about it in other spaces, but there is a breakdown in the analogy that organization and sport don't always overlap. But I think as far as performance goes, there is the idea that the good performers, the good athletes, the great corporate athletes, they recognize that when you're being mentored, you're being coached, that it's for their benefit. And I use the language of, do they have my best interest in mind? And so the people who I allow to speak into my life, because everybody's got advice for me.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody's got something to say, right?
Right.
So the test that I use to allow something into my life, into my heart, into my soul is, do they have my best interest in mind? Okay. Now, I don't care if they're going to make money on it or not. I understand that. But I ultimately want to know if they have my best interest in mind or not. And there's so many things that come along that they don't have my best interest in mind because they don't know me. They're offering me something that's drawing on me, like a social media thing. And there's some great stuff that comes across social media that, hey, are you this? Are you that? And you're like, yes, I'm all those things. Then sign up for this. You need this. And I immediately think, okay, wait a second. They can't have my best interest in mind because they don't know me. Right. So until they get to know me and understand me, that's when I'll realize that and look at it. And am I missing some great stuff? Maybe. But I'm happy with where I'm at and what I'm doing and what's going on. So I don't know that I'm missing it. And I want to make sure that whoever is whoever, and I use the phrase that I allow, because it truly is up to me, that I allow to speak into my life has a best interest in mind, or at least I'm confident that they're not only in it for what they can get out of it. And if those two things are there, then I'm going to listen and most likely try to apply what it is that they're teaching me. And I think that good athletes do the same thing. Not that you don't go hire a great coach who is an expert at this particular skill set and all that. You can do that and you can glean from that as well. But it's the coaches that end up being mentors for lifetime. And you hear interviews of athletes. I love listening to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar interviews, anytime he interviews, because I don't think an interview goes by where he doesn't talk about Coach Wooden and John Wooden, 50 years prior, who's now, gone and gone on now and all that kind of thing. But he still Coach Wooden had our best interest in mind. He was interested. Yes, he wanted to win basketball games. And yes, he was arguably one of the best coaches ever in any sport. But Kareem will tell you, and so does other players, by the way, they all tell you he wanted us to be better men. And that's why he did what he did. And so that's, I think, a classic example.
Yeah, I love that. And it's so true, because it's the people that help shape you that you're going to have a top of mind. If I said, Matt, I need you to come and train my executives at my corporation. But Matt, I'm going to tell you right now, not everybody's on board with you coming in. How do you handle that?
I'm like, I don't care.
I love it.
Seriously, I don't care. I'm leaving for a place in tomorrow, day after tomorrow. And it's a huge organization. And I know not everyone's excited about me coming in. They don't know what's going on. Who is this guy? What's he going to tell us? That kind of stuff. And my response to that is, I don't care, because here's what I know. And that's what I have to say isn't for everybody. And that's totally okay. I'm interested in the person who can hear what I have to say and find value in it. And because they're a learner, they're a seeker, they're open. And I have adopted the mindset and philosophy that if I'm listening to someone, there is always something of value to take from someone. So if you don't have that perception and you're always critical of everything you hear instead of trying to find the one nugget in everything you hear, those are two different approaches to life entirely. I'm not interested in helping that person who doesn't want to learn, and it's always critical. And, again, that might I might be mean, harsh. I don't know. I don't think it is. And so I don't care. I mean, it's like if I'm speaking to a group of 500 people, for example, and there's 20 people in the room who are anxious and want to hear what I have to say and are excited about it, then I'm only speaking to those 20 people, and every 480 other people can do whatever the heck they want. I don't care. Check your emails when I'm talking, do whatever. And if one or two people get value from it, it's totally worth it for me.
Oh yeah,
So
powerful, powerful. I loved your answer. I don't care. Because that just goes to tell me that your message is that powerful, right? That if they actually took the time to listen to what you're delivering, they will benefit, right?
right.
And that goes for anybody who is open-minded, right? Not closed-minded, growth-minded. Anybody who is looking to understand that the world does not always revolve around them.
Mhm.
Even though we all live in our own worlds, right? Because you live in yours, I live in mine, but we have to come together in this big
Right.
world that we all live in. So for me, it's always about the attitude, right? That we take into, like you said, take into any situation, because you can walk into a situation yourself and you go, not for me. And then
Right.
right? But if it is for you, then how do we get someone to fully engage when they're almost like they're on the fence, let's say?
Yeah. So for me, how I would do that, and this has certainly happened in my academic career with students,
Mm,
and advisees in particular. And I believe that burden falls to me. If someone's kind of on the fence, and I see that they have potential and value and a skill set, and of course everybody does, that everybody has something that they can give.
right.
So how I do that is, and again, I hope this doesn't sound too corny, but I believe this with all of my heart, and that's I try to make sure they understand that I have their best interest in mind.
Mm,
And it's not about what I can get out of this for my benefit if you do this. It's what you can get from it if you allow me in. And not everybody's going to be receptive to that. And that's totally okay. Like I said, that's up to them. But my effort and my focus becomes I need them to understand that I want them to genuinely and legitimately be successful. And
mm.
so that takes time, right? So I
Oh, yeah.
can't give myself in that way to everybody. And so I'm very, very quick to be, I'm not one of these guys who like has 1,000 clients and this and that and stuff like that. Cause I don't believe that's effective.
Right.
I want to get my message out to everybody in the world. So I want to do that. But the people who I invest in and give my life to, that's who I'm talking about here. And I take that very seriously. And I don't do that with everybody. And I think that's important. And so again, just to answer your question directly, I try to really focus on getting them to see and realize that I want them to be successful. And I'm doing or saying whatever it is because I really believe it will help them down the road.
Love that. Love that. So, Matt, talk to me about how your career has evolved, because even in life we go through different stages from being a child to a teenager to a young adult to a mature adult. And do we ever even mature? Do we
Yeah.
continue to grow, right? So that's the question for you. How has your career evolved, and what are the changes that you've noticed that you personally made in order for it to be where it is today?
Yeah. So I actually want to go back to one of the comments that Richard has, who was watching and typed in the
Okay.
thing,
All right.
because he mentioned, he asked, what about VUCA? And I think this is a perfect place to talk about that. So VUCA is an acronym for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, right?
Mm,
So this is the world we live in now. And had you asked me 30 years ago, if I thought the world was VUCA, I would have said no. I would have said, just because of of what just my maturity was a big part of that, because of what I needed to have to just control my environment. I needed to have stability, predictability, linearity, sequential progression. I needed that. I needed the world to be that way so that I could do what I wanted to do. And as I've grown and matured, I've realized more and more the world's not linear. It's not predictable. It is unstable. Bad things happen to good people, things like that. And I know we mentioned in our little pre-meeting discussion, just for those listeners who care, last year I was diagnosed with advanced metastatic prostate cancer. Scared me to death, and it still scares me to death. And I'm still in the middle of treatments for that and things like that. But I say that because that's part of the VUCA that happens, because you look back at your life and of course we misremember the past. So I know that this isn't entirely true, but you look back and you're like, man, I did everything right. I didn't do anything wrong. I don't deserve this. What did I do? The whole thing with your place in the universe becomes a question. It's like, God, are you punishing me, or is this just dumb luck, or, that kind of thing? How does that work? And that's part of the VUCA nature of life. Listen, there's things that happen that are unexplainable, unpredictable, not fair, and mature, I believe mature thinkers, mature decision makers understand that there's some of that in every aspect of life, from your personal life, private life, social life, professional life. There's VUCA involved. And this is why I'm so passionate about the topic of contextual intelligence, for example, or living an epic life. And it's because this idea of VUCA is real. And there's so many things that come into your world that disrupt it. And if you don't have a skill set to navigate a VUCA world, you're going to be obsolete and irrelevant, or you already are. Right. Or when those things do happen to you, they're going to derail you. When something unexpected happens, when an undesired change presents itself, when a horrible medical diagnosis presents itself, it completely derails you from your mission, your purpose, your destiny, your calling, whatever you want to call it. And we can't afford that. The world can't afford that, And so that's part of what I believe and think maturing is all about. And, some people will call it adulting. Whatever. I know that's a little cynical, but, we need to be adults and understand that not everything works out the way you want it to, or that you hope it does. And what we need to do to be strong, to be mature, is when those things take your breath away, recover your breath as quickly as possible and keep going. Right. And that's what I think important. And that's what I think is one of many foundational aspects of maturity.
It sure is. But you got diagnosed and you said it's scary, and it's still scary because you're in the middle of it. But you're being very, and I love this, you're being very proactive. Tell us what you're doing about it and how you're helping others.
Yeah. So one of the things that my wife and I did, when the diagnosis came, I immediately began to look for support groups and things like that. And where can I get some help and insight? Talk to my physicians about it. And they were like, well, there's some, but there's not many. And so my wife and I started a foundation. It's called Battle for the Bulge. So it's a little play on words, talking about prostate cancer and male anatomy. And, so it's kind of a tongue in cheek, but it's also very provocative and people know immediately what we're talking about. So Battle for the Bulge is a foundation that we started to raise education and awareness around the idea of prostate cancer in men. 1 in 8 men will be diagnosed with prostate cancer. Most of the time it's relatively treatable. In my case, it had metastasized and spread to some of my pelvis and some of my lymph nodes. And so it's a little bit more aggressive than most. But we started this Battle for the Bulge campaign where it's a 5K walk run kind of a thing where we raise awareness, we raise funds for prostate cancer research. So that's one thing that we've been doing. Our second annual race is coming up this September.
Nice.
The other thing that we've
Where,
done,
where is that race going to be? So anybody listening, maybe they can
yeah,
come.
if you're in the Toledo, Ohio area, it's going to be in Sidecut Park on September 5th at 6 p.m. And you can reach out to me and I can give you the information on that. The other thing that's really important about what we did and what we're doing is during my radiation. So I had 38 days of radiation, and I had to cancel 40 days worth of activities. And actually more than that, a few days before and a few days after, because it really takes a lot out of you towards the end. At the beginning, I was like, what are they even doing? They're not even doing anything. By the end, I knew what they were doing because it was really wearing me down. But so I had to cancel essentially 2 months worth of speaking engagements, traveling plans, all that kind of stuff. And I made a commitment to myself with my wife's help and support that I'm not just going to lay around the house for 40 days and just feel sorry for myself. So I committed to write 1,000 words every day for 40 days. And so that's what I did. I woke up in the morning. I had radiation at 8 a.m. every day. So I woke up before that, wrote my 1,000 words, went to radiation, came back, and then just, did life. And what came from that 40 days, it was a book that I didn't even know. It was like the fourth day I realized I was hitting a stream, because I initially, the 1,000 words was just going to be cathartic, kind of just journaling my feelings, my emotions, etc. And about day 3 or 4, I began to realize there's something here. And I changed directions and I started writing on this idea of becoming epic. And so I wrote a new book. The book is actually in publication and press right now. It's coming out. Launch is going to be, July of 2025. The title of the book is Becoming Epic. And it talks a lot about contextual intelligence, which I've also written. The second edition of my contextual intelligence book is coming out in June. I'm happy to say during that same 40-day period, I rewrote the book Contextual Intelligence and added 3 new chapters and a whole bunch of new content and all that. So a second edition of that book is coming out in June. And then a month later, a brand new book is coming out called Becoming Epic. And EPIC is an acronym that stands for becoming excellent, becoming developing or having perspective, being inspired, and being compassionate. And so those, I believe, are the 4 things that you need to be or need to do in order to be epic. You need to be excellent. You need to have perception. You need to have inspiration, and you need to be compassionate. And so when you do those 4 things, I believe you are becoming epic.
Oh, without a doubt. So you'll have to come on my Author's Tales podcast, because that one will feature your book. When you started writing 1,000 words a day, did you count the words? Or did you use a program? How did you go about doing that? Because a lot of people can't even write 10 words.
Right.
I journal every day, so I know where you're coming from. Right?
Yeah, it was tough. It got easier as you go, because you do kind of get into. But no, I literally counted. I just opened up a Word document and just started typing. And and the bottom of the Word document, down on the left-hand side of the screen, there's a word count thing. Right. And when I hit 1,000, I stopped. And if it was mid thought, I just, okay, because usually by that time it's like, oh, I gotta go, I'm late, kind of a thing. So, but it took me on average, I actually, after a few days, started timing it. It took me about 75 minutes to write 1,000 words every day.
Wow, incredible. For some reason, my camera shut off. Now, I didn't shut off. I was still listening. So we've come, maybe the camera was telling me something. We've come to that time. What a great conversation we've had. You've taught us all so much. Tell us how somebody can reach you. Your website is going across the bottom. What can they expect when they reach out to you?
Yeah. So EA, you can expect a response. That's the other thing that I think is important. I'm not that guy who has someone else emailing and stuff for them, you can expect me to respond to you and personally. And I do, even to this day, my students and my wife thinks I spend way too much time, but I want to make sure people hear from me. So you can expect to hear from me if you reach out. And again, information is there on my website, MatthewKutz.com, on the screen. There is a tab for my books. So I've written 8 different books now. Some are academic textbooks and some are useful for real people. A lot of people don't like to read textbooks, me being one of them. But Contextual Intelligence is there. The pre-order for Becoming Epic is there, so you can pre-order that now. My wife and I have written a book on healthy marriage, so there's a marriage book there. Nice. We've also I wrote another book called Leadership, 42 Leadership Insights, so that's a fun one as well. But there's several books there. My podcasts are there. Other links to other podcasts I've been a guest on are there. Some of my research articles are there. There's all kinds of stuff there, bios and pictures and my client list and stuff you would normally expect to see on a website.
Right. Excellent. I got to tell you what an incredible time we had today. I am so thrilled that you took the time today to be here with me and to impart your knowledge with everybody listening. And thank you, Richard, for stopping by and making comments and being
it's good to see you, Richard.
And then also my good friend Emilio, he stopped by, gave us a little heart. But there's other people out there, people on Twitch, people in different areas who are listening. If you listen to this now or you watch the replay, I urge you to share this episode with someone who needs to hear this message, especially on raising your family, right?
Right.
Matt, thank you so much. I truly appreciate you, my friend. Hang out for a minute. Everybody else, have yourself an exceptional rest of the day, and we'll see you next time. Take care, everybody.
See you, everybody.
Bye-bye.